I shut off the engine and stayed in the truck for a few seconds longer than necessary. My knees were throbbing from 3 weeks of sleeping on military cots, hiking uneven terrain, and carrying more gear than any sane person would volunteer to haul across Oregon mud. The smell of pine needles drifted through the cracked window. Normally, that smell reminded me of home. Today, it just reminded me that I didn't want to be here. Koa lifted his head from the passenger seat and looked at me. His ears twitched once. "Yeah," I said. "I know." The heavy pressure of his body against the seat seemed to steady the inside of my chest. His breathing stayed slow and rhythmic, the same way it always did when he sensed I was running on fumes. My mother had called me 6 times over the previous week. Not because she missed me. Not because she wanted to know how training had gone. She wanted me at her retirement dinner. After 37 years as a school administrator, Joanne Rostova was finally retiring, and apparently appearances mattered. I grabbed my olive drab duffel bag from behind the seat. The thing weighed almost as much as a small refrigerator. Koa hopped out beside me. The familiar service vest rested securely across his shoulders. Together, we walked toward the house. The front yard looked like a magazine advertisement. Fresh landscaping, rental lighting. 2 white catering vans parked along the curb. Someone had probably spent more money on flower arrangements than I spent on groceries in a month. I opened the front door. The smell hit immediately: roasted beef, fresh bread, expensive perfume. The kind of catered event my family loved pretending happened every weekend. Nobody greeted me. Nobody even looked up. People moved through the living room carrying trays and folding chairs. I adjusted my grip on the duffel bag and stepped inside. Then I heard Kendall move those centerpieces another 6 inches. My older brother stood in the hallway wearing a navy suit that probably cost more than my truck payment. He was staring into a wall mirror while adjusting his cufflinks. Even after all these years, Kendall somehow managed to look like a man constantly preparing for a magazine cover photo. His eyes landed on my boots first. Then my uniform, then Koa. His expression immediately soured. "You actually brought the mutt?" There it was. Not hello, not welcome home, not how have you been. The mutt. Koa remained perfectly still beside me. Professional, disciplined. Better manners than most people I was related to. I set my duffel bag down. "Good to see you too," Kendall snorted. "I'm serious." He pointed toward the basement door. "I have venture capitalists arriving in an hour." He glanced at Koa again. "Keep him downstairs." For a moment, I honestly thought he was joking. Then I remembered who I was talking to. Koa is a federally certified service dog. Kendall rolled his eyes. "Great." He spread his hands dramatically, then federally certify him to stay out of sight. A caterer walking by nearly choked, trying not to laugh. I almost felt bad for her. Almost. Koa shifted closer to my leg. Not nervous, just aware. He always knew when someone's tone changed. My brother checked his watch. "I've got people investing 7 figures tonight. Congratulations. I'd rather they focus on my company." I nodded. "Then maybe give them something interesting to look at." His jaw tightened. That part landed exactly where I intended. One of the few advantages of having an ego the size of Kendall's was how easy it was to locate. You could practically hit it with a dart. He stepped closer. "You know what your problem is?" I smiled. "No. You think military service makes you special." I laughed. Actually laughed. Not because it was funny, because it was ridiculous. I spent the last 21 days eating cold meals and sleeping in mud. I picked up my duffel bag. If that's your definition of special, you should try it. The caterer definitely laughed that time. Kendall shot her a glare. She disappeared into the dining room immediately. I started walking toward the kitchen. Behind me, Kendall called out, "Just keep the dog out of photographs." I didn't answer. There was no point. People like Kendall treated every conversation like a business presentation. They weren't listening. They were waiting for their turn to speak. The kitchen offered temporary relief. Fewer people. Less noise. I found a quiet corner near the back door and set down my bag. Koa immediately settled beside me. His head rested against my knee. The pressure helped. A lot. Sometimes people assume service dogs perform dramatic movie scenes every day. Most of the time, they do small things. They notice. They ground you. They remind your body that you're safe. I scratched behind Koa's ears. The tension in my shoulders eased slightly. Through the open archway, I watched guests arrive. Luxury cars lined the street. Expensive watches flashed under chandelier lights. Everyone seemed impressed by everyone else. My mother floated through the room greeting people, laughing, smiling, making introductions. Whenever she approached Kendall, her face brightened another level, like she'd personally invented him. I watched her hand him a glass of wine. She adjusted his tie, straightened his jacket, the same way she'd done when he was 16. Some things never changed. She still saw him. I wasn't sure she'd noticed I'd arrived. Koa nudged my hand. I looked down. He stared back with those steady brown eyes. No judgment, no expectations, just loyalty. Simple, honest, reliable. 3 qualities that felt increasingly rare inside this house. Then the front door opened again. More guests entered. The dinner hadn't even started yet. And somehow I already felt like an unwanted ghost wandering through someone else's life. Before we go any further, I want to ask you something. Have you ever walked into a room full of people who should have been proud of you, only to realize they were embarrassed you existed? Tell me in the comments. And if you enjoy powerful stories about family, dignity, and standing your ground when nobody else will, remember our new stories premiere every day at 8:30 a.m. ET and 1:30 p.m. ET. Make us part of your daily routine, and I'll see you at the next story. I kept my hand resting on Koa's head and watched the room fill with people who had no idea they were walking into a family performance. Military life teaches you something valuable. Not every fight deserves your participation. Sometimes the smartest move is to stand still and collect information. So that's what I did. Koa remained locked in a perfect heel position beside my chair. Across the room, Kendall was already in full presentation mode. You could practically see the switch flip. The same man who had called my service dog a mutt 20 minutes earlier was now smiling like a campaign candidate. He shook hands, remembered names, laughed at jokes that weren't funny. One investor mentioned golf. Suddenly, Kendall loved golf. Another mentioned hiking. Apparently, Kendall had always been passionate about hiking. A third brought up artificial intelligence. Now Kendall was a visionary leader shaping the future. I almost admired the efficiency. The man could reinvent his personality faster than most people changed shirts. My mother floated from guest to guest carrying a tray of wine glasses. Every few minutes, she found another excuse to mention Kendall's company. My son built everything from scratch. Kendall works harder than anyone I know. He barely sleeps. That last one made me smile. The last time I'd seen Kendall before this dinner, he'd complained because a coffee shop opened 15 minutes late. Apparently, suffering was relative. A server passed through the kitchen carrying miniature crab cakes. I grabbed one. Koa looked up hopefully. Nice try. His ears lowered dramatically. I had seen soldiers fake injuries less convincingly. The evening continued. Conversations blended together, investment strategies, startup valuations, market expansion, private schools, vacation properties. The strange thing wasn't that these people were wealthy. The strange thing was how badly they wanted everyone else to know it. One man spent nearly 10 minutes explaining why his watch was special. Another somehow worked the price of his boat into 3 separate conversations. I started counting. He reached 4 before I gave up. Then an older investor wandered toward the kitchen. Unlike most of the others, he wasn't talking. He was observing. Those people were usually more interesting. His eyes landed on my uniform, then Koa, then the patches on my sleeve. He approached politely. Army? Yes, sir. Breached you back? Just finished a field exercise. He nodded. German Shepherd? Koa. Beautiful dog. Koa accepted the compliment with the dignity of a celebrity attending an award ceremony. The man smiled. Then he glanced through the archway. Are you family? Before I could answer, my mother appeared. Perfect timing. She stepped between us carrying 2 wine glasses. Oh, you've met Delaney. The investor smiled. I was just asking. My mother hesitated, only for a second. But I noticed, because I always noticed. The same way you notice movement in the tree line when everyone else thinks the forest is empty. Then she forced a smile. She's taking a break from life in the army. Taking a break. Not serving, not stationed, not completing training exercises, not recovering from injuries, taking a break. The investor nodded politely. But something about his expression shifted. Not judgment. Confusion. Because even he knew the explanation didn't make sense. My mother quickly redirected the conversation. Kendall would love to tell you about his newest project. And just like that, they walked away. The entire interaction lasted maybe 15 seconds. Long enough. Koa felt it before I did. His body immediately pressed against my leg. Heavy, warm, steady, deep pressure therapy. A task he had performed hundreds of times. My pulse slowed. My breathing evened out. I scratched behind his ear. Good catch. His tail thumped once against the floor. No drama, no scene, nobody else even noticed. That was the thing about being erased. Most people think it happens loudly. It doesn't. It happens in tiny moments. A conversation redirected. An achievement ignored. A sacrifice minimized, one small cut at a time. The room suddenly burst into laughter. Kendall was telling another story. I listened from the kitchen. According to Kendall, his company's success came entirely from his willingness to take risks. Interesting. Because I remembered our father refinancing his house 12 years earlier to help fund Kendall's first startup. I remembered the failed company before that, and the one before that. I remembered every family bailout disguised as entrepreneurial courage. But history tends to become flexible when enough money enters the conversation. The investor group loved him. Why wouldn't they? He was giving them exactly what they wanted. A self-made genius, a visionary founder, a future billionaire. The myth was polished. The reality had been edited out. One woman eventually joined me near the kitchen island. She looked to be in her late 40s, professional, sharp, the kind of person who listened more than she talked. Army life? She asked. Most days. She laughed. That sounds like a story. Depends on the day. She glanced toward Kendall, then back at me. You don't seem impressed. I took a sip of water. I've known him too long. That earned a genuine laugh. For the first time all evening, somebody laughed without trying to impress anyone. Fair enough, she said. Then someone called her name from the dining room. She left. The noise continued building as more guests arrived. Glasses clinked. Servers moved through the crowd. Music played softly through hidden speakers. The house felt fuller by the minute. Yet somehow I had never felt more invisible. Not because strangers ignored me. Strangers owed me nothing. What lingered was something else. The realization that my family had become experts at shrinking me into whatever version made them most comfortable. The soldier became a phase. The injuries became an inconvenience. The years became a footnote. Across the room, my mother was laughing beside Kendall again. Neither of them looked toward the kitchen. Neither seemed to remember I was there. Koa rested his head against my knee, and for a moment I realized the only creature in that entire house who was paying attention to me was the dog. I rubbed the back of Koa's neck and waited for the crowd to drift toward the dining room. The kitchen finally grew quiet. Not silent. Just quiet enough that I could hear the refrigerator humming and the faint music playing somewhere near the living room. Most of the guests had gathered around the long dining table. The investors were exactly where Kendall wanted them, listening, watching, admiring. I was exactly where he wanted me, out of sight, fine by me. I picked up Koa's stainless steel water bowl from beside the pantry and carried it to the sink. The cold water splashed against the metal. Koa sat patiently a few feet away. His discipline always impressed people. The funny thing was that most people thought service dogs were trained primarily to obey. They weren't. They were trained to observe. Koa noticed things long before humans did. Changes in breathing, body posture, stress levels, danger, especially danger. I set the bowl on the floor. Drink. Koa lowered his head and began lapping up water. My duffel bag rested near the back door exactly where I'd left it. Most people would have seen an old military bag. Nothing special. Inside was equipment that absolutely did not belong in civilian hands. Part of my job required temporary custody of a secure communications device used during the field exercise. The equipment was signed out to me, documented, tracked, protected under regulations that were very clear and very unforgiving. Lose it, and your career could disappear. Allow unauthorized access and your problems became much larger, which was why the bag never left my sight for long. I walked toward it. That was when the kitchen door swung open. Hard. Kendall entered looking nothing like the polished entrepreneur from the dining room. The smile was gone, his face was red, his tie was slightly crooked. Something had happened. I had a pretty good guess what. He stopped 3 feet away. There you are. I looked at him. Congratulations. You found the kitchen. His eyes narrowed. Normally that kind of comment would have made me feel better. This time it didn't. Something was different. Then he said it. One of the investors spent 20 minutes asking about your dog. There it was. Not business, not funding, not strategy, attention. Somebody had paid attention to something other than Kendall. That was the real crime. I leaned against the counter. Okay. He laughed once. A short, angry sound. Do you have any idea what's happening tonight? People are eating expensive chicken. His jaw flexed. I'm closing the biggest deal of my life. Then you should probably be in the dining room. Instead of leaving, he stepped closer. The distance between us shrank. Koa immediately lifted his head. Not aggressive, alert, watching. Kendall pointed toward the back door. I want you gone. I wasn't surprised. Honestly, I was surprised it had taken this long. The dinner isn't over. I don't care. You invited me. No, Mom invited you. Fair point. I bent down and reached for my duffel bag. The plan was simple: leave, drive back to base, never attend another family event. Problem solved. Then Kendall made the mistake that changed everything. He stepped forward suddenly, fast, too fast. His hand shot toward the duffel bag. Give me that. Years of training kicked in automatically. Not fear, assessment, distance, movement, intent. The same process happened every day in the military. You learn to recognize when a situation changes. This situation changed instantly. Before I could even react, Koa moved, not toward Kendall, between us. One smooth motion, one practiced response. His body positioned itself directly in front of me. A living barrier, a trained shield. Exactly what he had been taught to do. Koa didn't bark, he didn't lunge, he didn't show his teeth. He simply stood his ground. A low warning huff escaped his chest, the kind of sound that said one thing. Stop moving forward. Any reasonable person would have understood. Kendall wasn't interested in being reasonable. His face twisted. The expression shocked even me. Not because it was angry, because it looked personal, as if Koa had somehow insulted him. The room stayed perfectly still, for half a second. Then Kendall drew his foot back. I remember every detail. The shine on the leather shoe, the sudden movement of his shoulder, the shift of his balance. I knew what was coming, but not fast enough. The kick landed hard against Koa's ribs. The sound echoed through the kitchen. A sickening thud, leather against bone, the kind of noise that instantly tells you something is wrong. Very wrong, Koa cried out, a sharp yelp. His body slid across the tile floor, the water bowl overturned. Cold water spread across the kitchen. For 1 second, everything stopped. The refrigerator, the music, the entire world. My eyes locked onto Koa, not Kendall. Koa, training overrides emotion. That's one of the first things military service teaches you. Handle the emergency first, feel something later. I dropped to one knee beside him. My hands moved automatically. Checking breathing, checking posture, checking for immediate injury. Koa tried to stand, good sign, but he moved carefully, too carefully. My stomach tightened. Not panic, something colder, much colder. Kendall stood over us, breathing heavily, as if he expected applause, as if he had just solved a problem. Then voices drifted in from the hallway, guests, approaching. Kendall looked toward the sound, and for the first time all evening, I realized he wasn't worried about what he had done. He was worried that someone might see it. I slid one hand under Koa's harness, slowly, carefully. His eyes found mine, still focused, still trusting, even now. That somehow hurt more than the kick itself. The approaching voices grew louder. A few more seconds and someone would enter the kitchen. But standing there beside my injured dog, looking at my brother's face, I already knew something fundamental had changed. Kendall thought this was an argument. A family disagreement. A moment that would disappear if everyone pretended hard enough. He had no idea what line he had just crossed. I slid my hand beneath Koa's harness and helped him steady himself before anyone else entered the kitchen. The voices in the hallway were getting closer. A few seconds later, somebody laughed near the dining room. Another guest asked for more wine. Life continued. That's what always amazed me about ugly moments. The rest of the world rarely stopped to acknowledge them. Koa shifted his weight carefully. I ran both hands along his ribs, slow, methodical. Years of military training had created habits that never really left. Assess first, react second. His breathing was controlled, no obvious deformity. No immediate signs of a fracture. But there was tenderness, a lot of tenderness. When my fingers reached the area where the kick had landed, his muscles tightened. That told me enough. I looked down at his service vest. The black federal identification patch was still attached. The reflective strips were intact. But one of the reinforced straps had been torn open. The metal buckle from Kendall's shoe had sliced through part of the harness during the impact. A damaged service harness, an injured service dog. My mind quietly filed both facts away. Across from me, Kendall was still breathing hard. The anger that had fueled the kick was already fading. Now he just looked irritated. Like a man who had spilled coffee on an important document. An inconvenience, nothing more. Then his finger stabbed toward the back door. Get your mutt out of my house. I didn't answer. That seemed to frustrate him even more. Most bullies expect participation. They need resistance. They need emotion. They need evidence that they've gotten inside your head. I gave him nothing. Koa remained beside me. I scratched behind his ears once. Then I stood. The movement seemed to confuse Kendall. Maybe he expected yelling. Maybe he expected tears. Maybe he expected me to finally give him the fight he'd been trying to start all evening. Instead, I simply adjusted Koa's leash. His face darkened. Did you hear me? I looked at him calmly. I heard you. That wasn't satisfying for him. I could tell. His eyes darted toward my duffel bag. Then something reckless happened. He grabbed it. The bag weighed close to 70 pounds. Kendall nearly lost his balance lifting it. For a brief moment, I almost laughed. Almost. He staggered 2 steps toward the pantry, then yanked the door open. The heavy bag crashed against shelves filled with catering supplies and unopened wine bottles. The impact rattled everything inside. A few bottles clinked together. Then he slammed the pantry door. Hard. The deadbolt clicked. He pulled the key free and dropped it into his pocket. The entire sequence took less than 10 seconds. 10 seconds. That's all it took. My classified communications equipment was now locked inside a civilian pantry. Unauthorized detention of federal property. Another fact quietly joined the list. Kendall folded his arms. There it was, the victory pose. The look he always wore whenever he thought he'd won. I had seen it when we were kids. I had seen it when he blamed classmates for things he started. I had seen it when our mother cleaned up every mess he made. Nothing had changed. Only the price tags had gotten bigger. You can pick it up tomorrow, he said. Tomorrow. The word almost sounded funny because tomorrow was not an option. Not for that equipment. Not under military regulations. Not under federal law. Not under any circumstance. I said nothing. The silence unsettled him. People often mistake silence for weakness. The military teaches the opposite. Silence is usually where decisions get made. A shadow appeared in the doorway. My mother. Joanne stood there holding a wine bottle. For a moment, nobody spoke. She had seen enough. Not everything, but enough. The overturned water bowl, the damaged harness, Koa's posture, the locked pantry. Kendall's expression, Mai's expression. Any reasonable adult could have connected the dots. My mother looked directly at Kendall. Then at me, then back at Kendall. I watched the calculation happen. Not concern, not confusion. Calculation. She was deciding which version of reality would cause the least disruption to her dinner party. The answer arrived quickly. She looked away, actually looked away, toward the dining room, toward the guests, toward the retirement celebration, anywhere except the truth standing directly in front of her. That hurt more than I expected. Not because it surprised me, because it didn't. 32 years old. And somehow she still found new ways to choose him. A few seconds passed. Then she cleared her throat. We have guests. That was it. No questions. No concern. No what happened. Just logistics. Protect the evening. Protect Kendall. Protect appearances. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger. Anger burns hot. This felt different. Cold. Precise. Final. Like a door quietly locking. The funny thing about disappointment is that eventually it reaches capacity. After enough years, there's simply no room left for more. I looked at my mother, then at Kendall. Then at the pantry door. I understood everything, not emotionally, operationally. The situation was suddenly very simple. My family had made their choice. Now I could make mine. I reached for Koa's leash. He stood immediately despite the discomfort, still disciplined, still focused, still doing his job. I envied that sometimes. No politics, no favoritism, no hidden agendas, just loyalty, pure and uncomplicated. My mother shifted awkwardly. Maybe she expected another argument. Maybe she expected me to beg for the key. Maybe she expected me to defend myself. Instead, I nodded once, understood. The word landed harder than shouting ever could. Kendall smirked. He thought I was surrendering. That was the problem with people like him. They confused silence with defeat. I walked past both of them. Neither tried to stop me. The back door opened. Cold Oregon air rushed inside. The temperature had dropped since sunset. The smell of pine returned immediately, cleaner than anything inside the house. Behind me, I could hear dinner continuing. Glasses clinking, music playing, guests laughing. The party was alive and well, as if nothing had happened. I stepped onto the patio. Koa moved beside me. The porch light cast a pale circle across the concrete. For a moment, neither of us moved. I rested a hand on his shoulder. His breathing remained steady. Good, that mattered. The rest could be handled. Behind the house, beyond the trees, The distant glow from the military installation barely touched the horizon. I stared at it for several seconds. Then I reached into my pocket and unlocked my truck. The headlights flashed once in the darkness. A simple signal, a destination, a decision. And for the first time all evening, I felt absolutely certain about what I was going to do next. I turned onto the highway and pointed the truck toward the installation, without looking back. The house disappeared behind a wall of trees within minutes. Good. I had no interest in seeing it again that night. Koa lay across the back seat instead of the passenger side. That alone told me how much the kick had hurt. Normally, he insisted on riding shotgun. Tonight, he barely moved. Every few minutes, I checked him in the rearview mirror. His eyes remained open, alert, breathing steady, still working, still watching me. I reached one hand behind the seat at a red light. You did your job? His tail tapped the seat once. That was enough. The gates of the installation came into view 38 minutes later. The military police officer at the entrance recognized my truck immediately. He waved me through without delay. I drove straight past the barracks, past headquarters, past the maintenance yard. The veterinary clinic sat near the eastern side of the base. Several lights were still on. Good. I parked near the entrance and climbed out. The ache in my knees returned immediately. I ignored it. Koa carefully stepped from the truck. A young specialist holding the clinic door open spotted the damaged harness. His expression changed instantly. Ma'am, need a vet. Right now. He nodded. No questions. No hesitation. The military is efficient when people stop talking and start listening. Within 3 minutes, Koa was inside an examination room. Captain Elena Mercer, the base veterinarian, entered carrying a tablet. She had examined military working dogs, service animals, and enough stubborn soldiers to qualify for sainthood. She crouched beside Koa. What happened? Civilian assault. That got her attention. She carefully examined his ribs, checked mobility, palpated the injured area, measured breathing, asked a few direct questions, no wasted words. 20 minutes later, she removed her gloves. Nothing appears broken. I released a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. She pointed toward the scans. Heavy bruising, internal injuries, none that I can see. Recovery time? Several weeks. Koa looked insulted by the entire conversation. The moment she finished, he attempted to stand. Captain Mercer pushed him gently back down. Not a chance. He sighed dramatically, the kind of sigh usually reserved for teenagers asked to clean their rooms. For the first time all evening, I almost smiled. Then the clinic door opened. The room immediately became quieter. Not because anyone stopped talking, because everyone noticed who had entered. First, Lieutenant Gideon Baines walked inside carrying a folder. Baines wasn't physically imposing. Average height, lean build, calm voice. The kind of officer civilians would probably overlook. That would be his mistake. Every platoon has one person who can stop an entire room simply by appearing. For us, it was Baines. He glanced toward me, then Koa, then the damaged service vest resting on the examination table. His eyes narrowed slightly. That was the closest thing Gideon Baines had to visible emotion. He stepped forward. What happened to the dog? Civilian assault. His jaw tightened, not dramatically, just enough. Then his gaze moved lower, toward my empty hands, a tiny detail. Most people wouldn't have noticed. Baines noticed everything. His eyes immediately returned to mine. Rostova, sir, where's your secure comms gear? There it was. The question, simple, direct, important. I stood straighter, not because he demanded it, because some conversations require precision. I met his eyes. A civilian assaulted a federally registered service animal. He remained silent. I continued. The same civilian forcefully detained United States military property currently assigned to my custody. Silence. The equipment is secured inside a locked civilian residence. The room became very still. Even Captain Mercer stopped typing. Baines didn't interrupt, didn't ask how I felt, didn't ask if I was okay. That wasn't his job. His job was assessing facts. And the facts were bad, very bad. A service animal assaulted, federal equipment detained, chain of custody compromised, civilian interference. Every sentence made the situation worse. Finally, Baines spoke. Who? Kendall Rosistova, my brother. That seemed to annoy him even more. Not because Kendall was family. Because family should have known better. Baines looked toward the torn harness, then toward Koa, then back at me. Any witnesses? Approximately 40 guests attended the event. His expression didn't change, but I could practically hear the gears turning. Witnesses. Evidence, documentation, reports, procedures. The Army loves procedures. especially when civilians decide to interfere with federal property. Baines reached for the radio clipped to his vest. No hesitation, no dramatic speech, no emotional reaction, just action. He pressed the button. "Duty, Sergeant." Static crackled briefly, then a voice answered, "Go ahead, sir." Baines looked directly at me, as if confirming one final time that I was certain. I was. He keyed the microphone. "Spin up the transport." A brief pause followed. Then he delivered the sentence that changed everything. "We have a retrieval mission." The duty sergeant didn't ask questions. Roger that. The radio clicked off. That was it. No yelling, no threats. No speeches about justice. Just a decision. Military decisions often sound smaller than they are. A convoy does announce itself when it's being assembled. Paperwork doesn't make noise while it's moving through the chain of command. Authority rarely needs volume. Captain Mercer looked between us. "You mean tonight?" "Negative." Baines checked his watch. "Tomorrow morning." He turned toward me. "You're not driving back there." "I wasn't planning to." "Good." His voice remained calm, steady, predictable. One of the reasons soldiers trusted him. Panic spreads. Calm spreads faster. Baines opened the folder he had been carrying. Inside were forms, transportation requests, incident documentation, equipment accountability records. The machine was already moving. I realized something then. For hours I had been standing alone inside that house. Alone in every meaningful way. Explaining, defending, enduring. Now I wasn't alone. Not because people felt sorry for me. Because procedures existed. Because rules mattered. Because accountability mattered. The military wasn't perfect. Far from it. But when something crossed a line, people didn't ask whether the offender was family. They asked what happened. Then they acted. Baines closed the folder. "Get some coffee. Sir, you look exhausted." That was his version of compassion. Not a hug, not a speech. Coffee. I almost laughed. "Yes, sir." As I headed toward the hallway vending machines, I glanced back one more time. Koa was resting comfortably. Captain Mercer was arranging medication. Baines was already coordinating details with the duty desk. Nobody looked dramatic. Nobody looked angry. They looked professional. And somehow that was far more intimidating. Because for the first time all night, I knew exactly what came next. And unlike my family, the Army always showed up when it said it would. I wrapped both hands around a paper cup of coffee and watched the first transport crew finish loading equipment before sunrise. Nobody spoke much. They didn't need to. The paperwork had already been completed. The incident reports had already been filed. Captain Mercer had documented Koa's injuries. Photographs had been taken. Statements had been recorded. Everything was moving exactly the way military systems were designed to move. Quietly, efficiently, relentlessly. By mid-morning, I was sitting in the passenger seat of a dark green transport vehicle rolling through familiar Oregon roads. Koa rested beside me. Captain Mercer had given him medication, but he was still alert enough to keep one eye open. Lieutenant Baines sat across from us reviewing documents. Every few minutes he flipped a page, made a note, moved to the next page. No speeches, no dramatic declarations, just preparation. Outside the windows, suburban neighborhoods gradually replaced forests and open roads. Then we entered my mother's subdivision. The houses looked exactly as I remembered. Perfect lawns, fresh paint, expensive landscaping. The kind of neighborhood where homeowners complained if someone's trash can stayed visible for too long. A fitting location for Kendall. The convoy slowed. I checked my watch. 10:47 a.m., right on schedule. Baines looked up. "Ready?" "Yes, sir." He nodded once. Nothing more. The lead vehicle continued forward. Then I saw the house. Front lawn looked like a luxury magazine advertisement. White tents, catering tables, fresh flower arrangements. Servers moving through the crowd carrying trays. Apparently retirement dinner had evolved into victory brunch. Why celebrate once when you could celebrate twice? Guests filled the lawn. Many of them were familiar. Several investors from the previous evening had returned. A few luxury vehicles lined both sides of the street. Near the center of the gathering stood Kendall, smiling, laughing, performing. His suit was different from the night before. The attitude wasn't. My mother stood nearby carrying a tray of mimosas. Her retirement apparently now included champagne service. For a moment, I simply watched. Neither of them had any idea what was coming. Then the first vibration started. It was subtle, barely noticeable. A faint tremor moving through the pavement. One of the champagne glasses on a serving tray rattled softly. A guest glanced downward, then ignored it. The vibration returned, stronger. A low mechanical hum rolled through the neighborhood. Conversations began to fade. Heads turned. People looked toward the far end of the street. The sound kept growing, not loud. Heavy, rhythmic. The unmistakable sound of military vehicles moving in formation. I watched confusion spread through the crowd. Someone stopped mid-conversation. Another lowered a champagne glass. Several guests stepped closer to the curb. Then the convoy appeared. 3 dark green troop transports emerged from around the corner. Behind them came 2 local police cruisers. Their emergency lights flashed silently in the daylight. No sirens, no chaos, no rush. The vehicles moved with deliberate precision. That somehow made the scene more intimidating. Panic is unpredictable, discipline is not. The lead transport stopped directly in front of the house. The second vehicle positioned behind it. The third completed the formation. The police cruisers settled into place. The entire street was effectively blocked. Conversations died instantly. Even the catering staff froze. One server nearly dropped a tray of pastries. The only sound left was the idle rumble of diesel engines. I looked toward Kendall. The change happened immediately. His smile vanished. The color drained from his face. For the first time in 24 hours, he looked uncertain. He scanned the vehicles, then the police cars, then the soldiers visible through the transport windows. His eyes finally landed on me. Standing beside Lieutenant Baines, standing beside Koa, the realization hit him all at once. I could see it. He had spent his entire life assuming consequences were negotiable. Family fixed things, money fixed things, appearances fixed things. This looked different. Very different. My mother stepped closer to him. "What is this?" Kendall didn't answer. The transport doors opened, metal hinges clanked, boots hit pavement. One after another, measured, controlled, professional. No shouting, no dramatic entrances. No one trying to look tough. They didn't need to. The discipline spoke for itself. Several investors exchanged nervous looks. A few quietly placed their drinks on nearby tables. One man actually took out his phone before immediately deciding against it. Smart decision. Lieutenant Baines stepped forward. His uniform was immaculate, his expression unreadable. The local police officers exited their cruisers and joined him. Everything remained calm. Almost unnervingly calm. Kendall attempted to recover. I watched him straighten his jacket, adjust his posture, force confidence back onto his face. The CEO mask. He started walking toward us, fast, too fast, the same mistake he always made, believing confidence and competence were the same thing. As he approached, several guests quietly moved out of his path. Nobody wanted to be standing nearby anymore. The atmosphere had shifted. Yesterday they saw a successful entrepreneur. Today they were looking at a man being approached by military personnel and police officers. Perception changes quickly, especially among investors. Kendall stopped several feet away. His smile looked painful, like he was forcing every muscle to cooperate. There must be some misunderstanding. Lieutenant Baines didn't respond, not immediately. He simply looked at Kendall. The silence stretched. Long enough to make people uncomfortable. Long enough for everyone watching to understand that this wasn't social. This wasn't personal. This was official. The investors stopped pretending to mingle. The catering staff stopped pretending to work. Even my mother had gone completely still. Because for the first time all weekend, nobody was controlling the narrative. Not Kendall, not Joanne, not anyone. The story belonged to facts now, and facts were arriving in uniform. I watched Lieutenant Baines raise one hand. That was all it took. No speech, no shouting, no dramatic command. Just a simple signal. 30 soldiers moved at once. The effect was immediate. The soldiers stepped away from the transports and spread across the property with practiced precision. They weren't rushing. They weren't trying to intimidate anyone. That somehow made it worse. Within seconds, they formed a complete perimeter around the front lawn, the driveway, and the edges of the property. Then they stopped. Every one of them stood at parade rest, hands behind their backs, eyes forward, motionless, silent. The entire neighborhood seemed to stop breathing. A child riding a bicycle on the next street slowed to a halt. A dog barked somewhere in the distance and then fell quiet. Nobody on the lawn knew what to do, because there was nothing to react to. No threats, no yelling, no confrontation. Just 30 disciplined soldiers standing perfectly still. The psychological effect was devastating. Investors who had spent years negotiating million-dollar contracts suddenly looked uncomfortable holding champagne glasses. One woman quietly stepped backward. Another guest lowered his mimosa and stared at the soldiers, as if trying to understand what was happening. My mother's face had gone pale. She looked from the soldiers to Kendall, then back again. The reality of the situation was beginning to settle in. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't family drama. This wasn't something she could smooth over with a smile and a change of subject. Lieutenant Baines started walking toward the house. The 2 police officers moved with him. I walked beside them. Koa remained perfectly at heel despite his injuries. His pace never changed, neither did mine. The crowd parted automatically. Nobody had been told to move. They simply did. People tend to move away from certainty when they realize they can't influence it. Kendall attempted one final recovery. I almost admired the effort. Almost. He straightened his shoulders, forced another smile, extended both hands. The public relations version of Kendall had returned. "Lieutenant, right?" Baines didn't answer. "There's clearly been some misunderstanding." No response. Kendall laughed nervously. "I think sister may have overreacted." Still nothing. That silence was becoming a weapon. For years, Kendall had survived by controlling conversations, controlling perception, controlling narratives. You can't control silence. You can't negotiate with it. You can't interrupt it. The driveway suddenly felt much longer than it actually was. Every step forced Kendall to confront something unfamiliar, consequences. One of the police officers reached into a folder. Kendall noticed immediately. His smile weakened. The officer removed a document. Official. Stamped. Signed. Real. He handed it directly to Kendall. "Kendall Rostova." The officer's voice was calm, professional. "You are being charged with felony animal cruelty involving a federally protected service animal." The smile disappeared completely. The officer continued, "And the unauthorized detention of federally controlled government property." Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. The entire lawn listened. I watched several investors exchange looks. Those weren't curious looks. Those were exit strategy looks, the kind people make when they suddenly realize they're standing beside a problem. My mother stepped forward. "There has to be some mistake." The second officer addressed her politely. "Ma'am, please remain where you are. Not aggressive, not rude, just firm. The kind of firmness that leaves no room for discussion." Kendall looked at me. For the first time all weekend, he wasn't angry. He wasn't arrogant. He wasn't mocking. He was confused, genuinely confused, as if he couldn't understand how events had reached this point. That was the thing about living without accountability. Eventually, you stop recognizing the connection between actions and outcomes. "You called the army?" I looked at him. "No." His forehead creased. "Then what is this?" "You locked military property inside a pantry." The words landed harder than I expected. Because they were simple, undeniable, true. The officer spoke again. "Do you have the key, Mr. Rostova?" Kendall hesitated. Wrong answer. The officer repeated the question. "Do you have the key?" Slowly, Kendall reached into his pocket. The same pocket. The same key. The one he'd dropped there the night before while feeling victorious. The officer accepted it. Then both officers headed toward the house. Nobody stopped them. Nobody tried. The front door opened, closed. The crowd remained frozen outside. 30 soldiers remained motionless around the perimeter. The silence kept growing heavier. A few moments later, something interesting happened. One investor quietly set down his champagne glass, then another, then another. Nobody announced they were leaving. Nobody created a scene. One by one, they simply started walking toward their vehicles. The woman who had asked me questions in the kitchen the previous night shook her head once before heading toward a black SUV. A man who had spent 10 minutes discussing his luxury watch suddenly became very interested in reaching his car. Another investor avoided eye contact entirely. The exodus spread quickly, not because of fear, because investment depends on trust. And trust evaporates when police officers and military personnel show up to retrieve government property from a CEO's house. Kendall noticed them leaving. That hurt him more than anything else. I could see it. Every departing investor took a piece of his carefully built image with them. Years of networking, years of presentations, years of branding, walking away in expensive shoes. The front door opened again. The officers emerged carrying my olive drab duffel bag. One officer handed it directly to me. I checked the seal, intact. I checked the lock, intact. Chain of custody restored. Mission accomplished. Simple. Professional final. Kendall stared at the bag, then at the departing investors, then at the soldiers. Then at me. His entire world had been built on appearances. Appear successful, appear powerful, appear important. Now reality had arrived, and reality doesn't care about appearances. It only cares about facts. Around us, vehicles started pulling away from the curb, one after another, quietly. No speeches, no confrontations, no dramatic goodbyes, just people leaving. 90 seconds earlier, Kendall had been hosting a celebration. Now he was standing alone on a lawn full of empty chairs, and not a single soldier had raised their voice. I tightened my grip on the recovered duffel bag and watched the last investor drive away. The street that had been packed with luxury vehicles less than 15 minutes earlier looked strangely empty. A few catering staff remained near the tents. Nobody knew quite what to do. The celebration was over. Not because anyone officially ended it, because reality had ended it. The police officers exchanged a few quiet words near their cruiser. One of them glanced toward Kendall, then nodded to his partner. The process moved forward, professional, routine, unavoidable. For the first time in my life, nobody was rushing to protect him. No teacher, no neighbor, no family friend, no mother, just consequences. Kendall seemed to realize it too. His confidence finally collapsed, not gradually, all at once. The man who had spent years presenting himself as the smartest person in every room suddenly looked lost. The officer stepped behind him. "Turn around, sir." Kendall blinked. "What? Turn around." The officer's tone remained calm. Kendall looked toward my mother, the way children look for help when they've broken something expensive. "Mom." Joanne immediately moved forward. "Must be another way." The officers remained professional. Neither argued. Neither reacted. One simply repeated the instructions. "Kendall, turn around." His shoulders sagged. The handcuffs clicked into place. The sound was surprisingly small. Years ago, I imagined moments like this would feel satisfying. Victorious, maybe even joyful. They didn't. Standing there, watching my brother being led toward a police cruiser, felt less like revenge and more like watching a building finally collapse after years of ignored structural damage. The collapse wasn't sudden. The warning signs had existed forever. People just chose not to see them. My mother finally broke. She hurried across the lawn toward me. Tears streamed down her face. Mascara smudged beneath her other eyes. The perfect retirement weekend had completely disintegrated. "Delaney," her voice cracked. "Please." I remained still. She grabbed my arm, not aggressively, desperately. "Please make them stop." The request almost sounded absurd, as if I controlled police departments, as if I controlled military regulations, as if I had somehow created this situation. Her fingers tightened around my sleeve. "We're your family." There it was. The word, family. The same word people often use when they want forgiveness without accountability. The same word used to excuse behavior that would never be accepted from strangers. For a moment, I simply looked at her. Not angrily, not coldly, just honestly. And something unexpected happened. I felt sorry for her, not because of what was happening to Kendall, because she still didn't understand why it was happening. 32 years. 32 years of choosing appearances over truth. 32 years of protecting one child by sacrificing another, and she still thought the problem started today. I gently removed her hand from my arm. The lawn had become completely silent. Even the catering staff were watching. I could feel dozens of eyes focused in our direction. My mother was crying openly now. "Delaney, please." I spoke quietly, but in the silence everyone heard it. "No, Mom." She stared at me, confused, heartbroken, almost offended, as if she had never imagined hearing that answer. I took a slow breath. "You just shared my roof." The words hung in the air. Several soldiers remained motionless around the perimeter. The police officers continued their work. Nobody interrupted. Nobody reacted. I turned slightly and looked toward the soldiers. 30 men and women, different ages, different backgrounds, different hometowns, some married, some single, some veterans, some barely old enough to buy a drink. Yet every one of them had shown up. Not because they liked me, not because they owed me a favor, because someone crossed a line, because rules mattered, because loyalty mattered. I gestured toward them. "They're my family." My mother's expression crumpled. I continued. "Because family doesn't ask you to stay small." The words felt lighter every time I said them, as if I had been carrying them for years. And family doesn't lock you out in the cold. Nobody moved. Nobody spoke. The truth didn't require decoration. It rarely does. My mother lowered her eyes. For the first time all weekend, she had nothing to say. No explanation. No excuse. No defense. Just silence. The same silence I had lived inside for years. Lieutenant Baines approached. Not close enough to interrupt. just close enough to let me know the operation was complete. His expression remained unchanged. Professional as always. I gave him a small nod, nothing dramatic, just acknowledgement. Mission completed, equipment recovered, documentation secured, personnel accounted for. Baines returned the nod, then he turned toward the soldiers. One command, one sentence. Break perimeter. The response was immediate. 30 soldiers moved simultaneously. The formation dissolved with the same precision that had created it. No confusion, no wasted motion. Within moments, they were returning to the transports. The crowd watched in silence. The neighborhood watched in silence. Even the wind seemed quieter. Koa shifted. The medication was making him sleepy. I scratched behind his ears, almost was done. His tail moved once. The transports began loading. Equipment first, personnel second. Exactly according to procedure. I climbed into the cab of one of the vehicles and settled into the passenger seat. For the first time in nearly 24 hours, everything felt still. No investors, no arguments, no performances, no pretending. Just quiet. Koa carefully climbed onto the seat beside me, then rested his head against my knee. The familiar weight settled there, warm, steady, real. Outside the window, the convoy began moving. My mother's house gradually disappeared behind us. Then the neighborhood. Then the entire chapter of my life that had kept pulling me back. I watched the road ahead, not the road behind. Because dignity isn't earned by convincing people to respect you. Some people never will. Dignity comes from recognizing when the fight itself is the trap. It comes from walking away from those determined to diminish you. It comes from understanding that loyalty is measured by actions, not blood. And sometimes the people who show up, when everything falls apart, aren't the people who share your last name. They're the people who refuse to leave your side when you need them most. Koa's breathing settled into a slow rhythm against my leg. The transport rolled steadily toward base. And for the first time in a very long time, I felt like I was finally going home. I spent a long time staring out the window after we left that neighborhood. Nobody was talking much. The convoy moved steadily down the highway. The mission was over. The reports would get filed. The legal process would take its course. Life would keep moving. That's usually how these stories end. The bad guy gets caught. The good guy moves on. Everybody gets a clean ending. Real life doesn't work that way. Because after the adrenaline wears off, you're left alone with the things you've learned. And sometimes the hardest lessons arrive decades late. I looked down at Koa sleeping beside me. His head was still resting on my knee. Every now and then his ears twitched. The medication was finally doing its job. For years, I thought the biggest problem in my family was Kendall. I was wrong. The biggest problem was me continuing to believe that one day things would be different. I kept thinking there would be a moment when my mother would finally see me. A moment when my brother would finally respect me. A moment when all those years of effort would suddenly matter. I was waiting for a movie ending. Life gave me reality instead. The truth is, some people make up their minds about you very early, and once they do, they filter everything through that decision. You can work harder, sacrifice more, achieve bigger goals, become stronger, become wiser, become more successful, and it still won't matter. Because they aren't looking at who you are. They're protecting the version of you that exists inside their own heads. That realization used to make me angry. Now it mostly makes me tired. I think a lot of people watching this story know exactly what I'm talking about. Maybe it's a parent, maybe it's a sibling, maybe it's an ex-spouse, maybe it's a boss. You've spent years trying to prove your value, years trying to earn respect, years trying to finally hear someone say, "I was wrong about you." And every time you get close, the goalposts move. Nothing is ever enough. Your success becomes luck. Your sacrifices become expectations. Your accomplishments become invisible. At some point, you have to ask yourself a difficult question. What if the problem isn't that you're failing to prove your worth? What if the problem is that you're presenting evidence to someone who already rejected the conclusion? That question changed my life. The military taught me many things. Some people think military service is mostly about weapons, discipline, or physical training. Those things matter, but one lesson mattered more than all the others. Don't waste resources on unwinnable objectives. Every mission requires time, energy, focus, attention. And if you keep pouring those things into the wrong target, eventually you have nothing left for the people who actually deserve them. For years, I treated my family's approval like a mission. I chased it, worked for it, sacrificed for it, defended it, protected it. And every year I walked away emptier. The strange thing is that most toxic relationships don't start with abuse, they start with hope. You keep believing the next conversation will fix things, the next holiday will fix things, the next achievement will fix things, the next apology will fix things. You become emotionally invested in a future that may never arrive. I know people who have spent 30 years waiting, 40 years waiting. Some spend their entire lives waiting, waiting for love that never comes, waiting for validation that never arrives, waiting for people to become someone they've repeatedly shown they are not. That's a heavy way to live, and it's completely unnecessary. One of the biggest mistakes I ever made was believing that boundaries were selfish. They aren't. Boundaries are simply honesty. They're the moment you stop pretending that harmful behavior is acceptable. They're the moment you stop negotiating with reality. They're the moment you finally say, "This is where my responsibility ends." Because here's something I wish I had learned much earlier. You can love someone without giving them unlimited access to your peace. You can care about someone without allowing them to keep hurting you. You can forgive someone without placing yourself back into the exact same situation. Those things are not contradictions, they're maturity. Looking back now, I don't regret serving in the army. I don't regret helping people. I don't regret the sacrifices. What I regret is how several years I spent trying to earn something that should have been freely given. Basic respect, not admiration, not praise, not applause, just respect. And if there's one thing I hope people take away from this story, it's this. You do not need to spend your life auditioning for a role in someone else's approval. Your value does not increase when another person finally notices it. Your dignity does not require a vote. And your worth does not depend on whether someone chooses to recognize it. Sometimes the healthiest thing you'll ever do is stop knocking on a door that nobody intends to open. Because at the moment you stop chasing validation from the wrong people, you finally have enough energy left to build a life with the right ones. And trust me, that life is a whole lot better. The older I get, the less interested I am in titles. Brother, sister, mother, father. Those words matter, but not as much as people think. Because titles tell you who someone is, actions tell you who they choose to be. For most of my life, I believed family was automatic. You were born into it. You stayed loyal to it. You protected it. End of story. That was the rule I grew up with. And honestly, I think that's the rule many people grow up with. We're taught that blood creates permanent obligations. We're told family comes first. We're told family is forever. We're told family should be forgiven, over and over again. What nobody talks about is what happens when those same people consistently fail you. What happens when the people who share your DNA don't share your values? What happens when they repeatedly choose their comfort over your well-being? Those questions don't have easy answers. I know because I spent years trying to find them. The funny thing is that I didn't learn the meaning of family inside my childhood home. I learned it in the army. I learned it from people who had absolutely no reason to care about me. One winter, a soldier in our unit received a phone call that his father had passed away unexpectedly. He was thousands of miles from home. No transportation, no plan, no idea how he was going to get there. Before lunch, 3 people had already volunteered money for airfare. By dinner, someone had arranged transportation. By the next morning, his entire problem was solved. Nobody asked what they would get in return. Nobody kept score. Nobody made a social media post about their generosity. They just showed up. That's family. Another time, one of our soldiers went through a nasty divorce. The kind that leaves a person staring at walls for hours. People took turns checking on him, inviting him to meals, making sure he wasn't isolating himself. Again, nobody was required to do that. Nobody's had signed paperwork promising emotional support. They simply recognized someone was struggling and decided that's not to leave him alone. That's family. One of the biggest misconceptions people have is believing family is defined by proximity. It isn't. Some of the loneliest people I've ever met live in houses full of relatives. And some of the most supported people I've ever met are surrounded by friends, coworkers, neighbors, and teammates who genuinely care about them. The difference isn't biology, it's behavior. That's why I always pay attention when someone says, "But we're family." Because that sentence can mean 2 very different things. Sometimes it means, we've been through life together. Other times it means, I want special treatment for behavior I wouldn't accept from anyone else. Those are not the same thing. Not even close. I've noticed something over the years. Healthy families don't constantly remind you they're family. They don't need to. Their actions do the talking. They call when you're struggling. They celebrate your successes. They tell you the truth when you're wrong. They protect your dignity when you're vulnerable. They don't compete with you. They don't diminish you. They don't need you to fail in order to feel important. One of the most damaging ideas people carry is the belief that loyalty means enduring anything. It doesn't. Loyalty isn't silent suffering. Loyalty isn't accepting disrespect forever. Loyalty isn't pretending harmful behavior is normal. Real loyalty works both ways. If only one person is sacrificing, that's not loyalty, that's dependence. If only one person is carrying the relationship, that's not loyalty, that's exhaustion. If only one person is expected to forgive, that's not loyalty, that's control. Those lessons took me a long time to learn, much longer than I care to admit. I kept confusing access with love. I thought if people had access to my life, my time, and my energy, it meant we had a healthy relationship. Not necessarily. Some people want access because it benefits them. Very different thing. Healthy relationships create peace. Unhealthy relationships consume it. And eventually, you learn to recognize the difference. One question changed the way I evaluate every relationship in my life. It's a simple question. Who shows up when things get difficult? Not when things are fun. Not when things are successful. Not when things are convenient. Who shows up when life gets messy? Who answers the phone? Who checks on you? Who stays? That's where the truth usually lives. When I think back to that weekend, I don't spend much time thinking about Kendall anymore. I don't spend much time thinking about my mother's choices, either. What I remember most clearly are the people who showed up. Captain Mercer taking care of Koa. The Dutchani Sergeant mobilizing resources without hesitation. Lieutenant Baines handling the situation professionally. 30 soldiers standing shoulder to shoulder because accountability mattered. None of them shared my last name. Yet every one of them acted more like family than the people who did. And that's the lesson I hope people take from this part of the story. Blood may create relatives. History may create familiarity. But family is built through actions. It's built through consistency. It's built through trust. It's built through showing up. And when life becomes difficult, those are the people worth holding on to. One of the biggest mistakes people make after hearing a story like mine is assuming the lesson is to cut everyone off. It isn't. If that's what you took away from this, then I probably didn't explain it well enough. I'm not telling anyone to walk away from their family at the first disagreement. I'm not saying every difficult relationship is toxic, and I'm definitely not saying people can't change. Because they can. I've seen people change. I've seen marriages recover. I've seen parents rebuild relationships with their children. I've seen siblings reconnect after years of silence. Human beings are capable of incredible growth when they genuinely want it. The important part of that sentence is genuinely want it. Because that's where many people get stuck. They confuse potential with reality. They fall in love with who someone could become instead of accepting who that person currently is. I did that for years. I kept believing that one day my mother would see things differently. One day Kendall would grow up. One day accountability would matter. One day the relationship would finally become healthy. I wasn't dealing with reality. I was negotiating with a fantasy. And fantasies are expensive. They cost time. They cost energy. They cost peace. The older I get, the more I realize that maturity often comes down to accepting reality faster. Not creating excuses for it. Not decorating it. Not pretending it isn't there. Just seeing it clearly. A lot of people watching this right now are carrying relationships that drain them every single day. You probably know exactly who I'm talking about. The person who always makes you feel guilty. The person who always minimizes your accomplishments. The person who somehow turns every conversation back to themselves. The person who only calls when they need something. The person who demands understanding but never offers any. The person who expects endless patience while giving none in return. And if you're being honest, you've probably spent years trying to fix it. Trying harder, giving more, explaining more, forgiving more, hoping more. At some point you have to ask a difficult question. Is this relationship actually improving? Or am I just becoming better at tolerating it? There's a difference, a very important difference. One leads to healing, the other leads to exhaustion. One of the healthiest concepts I learned as an adult was the idea of boundaries. And for a long time, I hated that word. It sounded selfish, cold, unkind. But that's because I misunderstood it. A boundary isn't punishment. A boundary is information. It's simply telling people what behavior you will and will not accept in your life. Nothing more. Healthy people may not always like your boundaries, but they respect them. Unhealthy people often react very differently because your boundaries remove access they previously enjoyed. That's why the moment you establish a boundary, some people suddenly accuse you of changing. And they're right. You did change. You stopped volunteering for mistreatment. That's not a flaw, that's growth. One thing I wish more people understood is that protecting your peace is not an act of aggression. It's an act of responsibility. You are responsible for your mental health. You are responsible for your emotional well-being. You are responsible for the environment you create around yourself. Nobody else can do that for you. And sometimes that means creating distance from people who consistently bring chaos into your life. Not because you hate them. Because you value yourself. There's a difference. I think about Koa sometimes when I talk about loyalty. People often laugh when I say that a dog taught me lessons about relationships. But it's true. Koa never cared about status. He never cared about money. He never cared about who was popular. He never cared who won arguments. His loyalty was simple, consistent, reliable. If I was having a bad day, he showed up. If I was struggling, he stayed close. If there was danger, he moved toward it, not away from it. That's what loyalty looks like. And honestly, some human beings could learn a lot from that. Maybe your version of loyalty isn't a service dog. Maybe it's a spouse who stood beside you during difficult years. Maybe it's a friend who answered the phone at 2 a.m. Maybe it's a neighbor who helped when nobody else did. Maybe it's a coworker who checked on you when everyone else disappeared. Those people matter, more than most of us realize. Because life eventually reveals who is committed to you and who is merely benefiting from access to you. And once you learn the difference, everything changes. If there's one final thought I want to leave you with, it's this. Don't spend your entire life standing outside a locked door. Don't spend decades begging for acceptance from people who have repeatedly shown you who they are. Don't waste your future trying to rewrite someone else's character. Some doors are meant to stay closed, not because you failed, because your life exists on the other side of them. And sometimes the bravest thing you'll ever do is stop knocking and start walking toward healthier relationships, toward better people, toward peace, toward the life you deserve. And if this story meant something to you, I hope you'll subscribe to the channel. We share stories about dignity, resilience, family, personal growth, and the difficult choices that shape our lives. New stories premiere every day, and we'd love to have you with us for the next one. Until then, take care of yourself, and don't forget to take care of the people who truly show up when it matters most.